I've covered this software before in my videos on Free Quizmaker. The reason being that when Free Quizmaker is deployed, or rather when the quizzes are deployed, they're deployed as flash games essentially. So it's only compatible with a web server. And that's actually true of quite a lot of applications that you can run in a web browser, interestingly enough. I'll demonstrate that in a minute. But the point is that MAMP is used as a simulator for people who want to develop web applications or who want to test their databases before deploying them. It's basically to save you a lot of embarrassment to not test your software on the general public before it's ready. And there's a lot of confusion between what is a simulator of a web server and what's really a web server. Because if you look over here on the right, MAMP actually runs an Apache web server and a MySQL database server simultaneously for real on your computer. So basically the distinction between MAMP and a real web server is only the settings. And some people actually use MAMP for their web server software, actually, because it's very easy to use. But the vast majority, as I understand it, use it for simulation to test their software. If we look at the history of it here, so here's the Wikipedia page for MAMP, and this is the description. MAMP is a solution stack composed of free and open source and proprietary commercial software used to run dynamic websites, basically meaning web applications, on Mac OS computers. And it says, because of MAMP's popularity, MAMP is now also available for Windows 7 and above. So I have run it on Windows 7. I've also run it on Windows 10. It seems to run very well. It's a very reliable program, even though it's rather complex because of all the different components. So it says MAMP is an acronym of Mac OS, the operating system, Apache, the web server, MySQL, the database management system. If you're familiar with SQL, you know there are many variants of SQL. PHP, which is a computer language that you use to communicate SQL queries or commands through a website. Most websites can only, well, actually, correction. Most websites which are compatible with SQL do not give you an SQL terminal to manage the database. They're usually graphical user interfaces programmed in PHP. And actually, PHP will not run on anything but a web server. This is actually an interesting quirk of it. And so if you're going to program in PHP and test anything, you need MAMP or something similar. If you don't want to actually put it on your web server and ask your friends, hey, does my website work? Because you have to ask them 20 or 30 times, and you might lose some friends. Actually, one thing I'm curious about that I didn't look up earlier is whether you can get a Linux version of it. Let's see if you can get Linux MAMP. So MAMP is available for Android. Theoretically, Android is based on Linux, but it doesn't fall into the traditional definition of Linux generally because it's developed by Google, it's supported by Google. It just isn't a substitute for something like Ubuntu or Debian. So it doesn't really have the pros to it that Linux normally does, other than that it's freeware, of course. And so basically the versions you have available are MAMP for Mac OS 10, not classic Mac OS 10, and Windows 7, 8, and 10. And as I said, the version I'm demonstrating here is running on 10. I've also used the Windows 7 version quite extensively. And they just mention here AMP Mac AMP. That's basically what it means. AMP is a whole series of software packages for running web servers on your computer, or running your computer as a web server. But as I said, MAMP is usually used for testing, and I will demonstrate some of those features next. So here's Firefox. This is the newest version, just released today. It is version 63.0 Quantum, 64-bit. So that means it can do a lot of different things. But obviously, if you know the basics of the World Wide Web, you know that it's coded in HTML. So when you open a page like Google in a web browser, you're really looking at this code, HTML code. So some people start learning how to program by learning how to code web pages, because technically HTML is a computer language. It's an interpreted language in the sense that you read it with a web browser, so another application. But it is a computing language. So you're loading it in Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or in this case, Secure Hypertext Transfer Protocol. But you can actually load ordinary files in a web browser. There are a lot of things you can load. So for example, I could open a text file right here. So it's just an example of Hello World, this stereotypical first program. But this is not HTML. If you look there, that's just a text file. And it loads it as if it's any other, text editor or whatever. Although this particular version of Firefox isn't designed to edit anything. It's just a web browser. HTML was basically a way of providing links between different pages. When it was originally developed, it wasn't entirely certain what it could be used for. But I will code a web page now, a very, very basic web page. And we will load that web page as a file. And I hope this will illustrate my point that all web browsers really do is read files, with the qualifier being that some files can only be read off of web servers where they're actually running. We'll look at HTML next.